Dr. Mackey put together some graphs in his video presentation where he maintained, he believed that all the chronic diseases share the same cause, and that is a dysfunctional metabolism fed by a poor lifestyle. And he believes that inflammation that is caused by eating foods that are high in free radicals and high in omega-6, such as the refined carbohydrates and oil products, these RCOs, these are driving a whole host of diseases. They all have a different name, Corn, but the genesis of all of these diseases, they're all the same. And you can't see it in the graph, but I'll just read them off. So if you have heart disease, if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, if we're trying to prevent Alzheimer's, or we're trying to prevent cancer, fatty liver, he focuses on high cholesterol. There's a fine point there we'll discuss in a little bit. High blood pressure. I know many of us have been afflicted with high blood pressure, a very dangerous situation that can lead to a blood vessel breaking in the brain or in the leg, and suddenly, you know, you're a goner. So all of these chronic diseases, Dr. Mackey and a lot of other people believe it's really one disease. It's really one disease, but just given different names because it's showing up in different areas of the body. One type of fat that a lot of the researchers point to is this whole notion of visceral fat. And that's all the fat around the midsection there. The fat cells generate their own hormones, and if that signaling is not getting properly interpreted by the brain, and the receptors in the brain are just getting dysfunctional, like that fixer-upper house that I explained earlier, these are going to lead to inflammation everywhere in the body. It's going to lead to heart disease and liver disease, and it's going to lead to oxidized cholesterol in the body, elevated blood pressure, and elevated triglycerides. Just to talk about the inflammation there, you're hearing bits and pieces about a term called cytokines, and that's a fancy word for chemicals in the body that are trying to excite something into action. And normally that call to action is calling in the immune system to do something. And when you suffer some injury and the immune system comes in, that's what causes inflammation. And heart disease, liver disease, cancer, all of these chronic diseases have a very close link to inflammation. If you reduce the inflammation, you can, at the same time, you are getting your whole hormones back in balance by what you're eating and by what you avoid eating. That is part of this restoring your health that we're trying to talk about here in the video. Just a little bit about visceral fat again. Let's say that my fist is a heart and it's pumping away. Remember I said that the owner of that belly in a few slides back, I thought it was just kind of a cosmetic problem to have that large of a belly. But when you take a look on the inside, and you can imagine your heart trying to beat, and then you wrap around all this fat all this fat that your heart is trying to beat, but it can't push away this fat fast enough. It's not a cosmetic problem. That fat is wrapping around your heart. It's wrapping around your liver. It's oozing and just filling up the inside of your liver. I mean, how is anything supposed to work properly? The point of it is, this is not a cosmetic problem. This is a very serious health problem. And I suppose maybe I go out on a limb here by stating that, you know, just having a BMI over normal should be a red flag for everybody. A red flag for everyone. Why is that? Because it's not cosmetic. It's not whether you can fit into this or that bathing suit or jeans or suit or something like that. It's because of this visceral fat that can be wrapping around your organs inside your body. And so if you're in that situation, one, you've got to restore your health, and then that visceral fat will start to disappear. There's another doctor that I've listened to on YouTube. His name is Dr. Peter Attia. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, and forgive me, dear doctor. But he had a program called The Straight Dope on cholesterol. And he, according to his information, inflammation is what drives heart disease. And RCOs play a big part in heart disease. And the striking news that came out of that video for me was this slide. And this is a little cutaway of the inside of your blood vessels, your arteries. And so what he's done, this is a little curved section here. He's just taking a little piece of that curve, this tube that's your artery, okay? And he's looking at the wall, the inner side wall of this artery, and he's looking at the whole artery itself. Now the wall is a little bit more than just one level of cells. You've got a number of layer of cells in there, and the layer that touches the blood, I think they refer to that layer as the epithelial layer of cells. And I think that's depicted here with this little, this kind of purplish red line there. And the rest of this curved shape here is the rest of the body, if you will, of the whole artery wall. So Dr. Attia said, Attia, not sure how to pronounce it, sorry. He said that even people in their teenage years are starting to form these plaques on the inside of their artery walls, and it's being caused by inflammation. Inflammation is a fancy word for an immune response that is trying to deal with injury on the inside of this very slippery epithelial cell wall that lines the inside of our arteries. So we're not just talking about heart disease here, we're talking about the whole cardiovascular system. Every place in your body needs the blood, every place in your body needs oxygen, they all need nutrients, and all the waste products from all the cells have to depart, and this whole cardiovascular system throughout the body, if we have injury that's being caused by inflammation, which is an injury to the cell wall, Dr. Attia said that even teens and preteens, people who are 9 and 10 years old, are starting to show some evidence of injury inside the lining of their arteries. And so he has a whole discussion on his on the YouTube about the causes of heart disease, and he's tried to make a very thorough investigation of its causes and how to prevent it. And one thing that really struck me is that people as young as 9 or 10 are showing the first signs of heart disease because of all this injury that's going on inside the heart, inside the blood vessels. And that's all being caused by hormone, a dysfunctional metabolism, and RCOs. Dr. Attia says that cholesterol in and of itself is not to blame. He says that there's a lot of new thinking on what's causing heart disease and what's driving it and what's causing cardiovascular disease throughout the body. He focuses on all the RCOs. Again, these are refined carbohydrates and refined oils, these industrial oils. These are oxidized concoctions that people are taking into the body. Now the liver is charged with trying to remove all these toxins from the body. The only way the liver can do that is converting something into fat. Maybe some of these items can be repackaged and sent into the and sent out of our waste disposal systems that we have in our body. But generally speaking, a lot of these things are packaged by necessity into triglycerides, and whenever you have fat that the liver is forced to make from sugars, it has to repackage these little fat globules inside of little protein molecules so that they can be exported out of the liver and over to the fat cells. And remember, the blood is mostly water, and you're trying to send fat to the fat cells for storage, and so these little transport vehicles, if you will, that have the fat inside, they also have to be packaged up with cholesterol, because cholesterol will make up the cell wall of this lipoprotein material, and cholesterol and triglycerides are going to end up in greater and greater numbers in the bloodstream as the liver is trying to send all this extra junk over to the fat cells. And the more the liver makes, the more of these particles the liver makes, and the less that can be taken up quickly by the cells, whether for energy or for storage, the longer you've got these particles in the bloodstream, and the longer they are exposed to what? What are they exposed to, Corn? What's the problem here? What's the problem here? They're getting exposed to excess sugars in the blood. They're getting exposed to oxidized materials. They're getting exposed to free radicals. So now you have molecules that were probably, you've got these things that are coming into the liver from what we're eating, and they probably contain pesticides and herbicides and endocrine disrupting compounds and all that just to begin with. They probably are oxidized sugars and refined high fructose things that find their way now into the liver, and the liver is trying to desperately repackage all this stuff and get it out of the liver and get it out of the blood, but you still have all these other compounds that are running around in the blood at the same time, attacking the very packages that the liver is trying to assemble to get all these things out of the blood. Well, it's amazing. It reminds me of that little comment from Sean Connery's movie in The Rock. It's amazing we ever made it out of puberty. Anyway. So as far as heart disease, there's a lot of doctors believe there's a lot of new thinking on the subject now. That the real cause is inflammation. The real cause is oxidative stress caused by all these RCOs, by these free radicals, by this mad crisis management activity by the liver to try to put these in triglycerides and form these LDL particles. LDL particles, Corin, you may have heard of LDL, of course you did. You used to work at a hospital. That's what they referred to as the bad cholesterol, if you have too many of those. But really the whole notion of cholesterol, there's cholesterol and then there's oxidized cholesterol. Oxidized cholesterol is getting much more buzz these days on the internet as well, because it's the oxidized stress, the oxidized foods that we are eating in the form of these RCOs, and the free radicals that are running around in the body that are destroying all these molecules left and right. It looks like a war zone in there, with bombs going off everywhere and limbs being torn limb from limb. That's really, in a very scientific fashion that I've just described, the cause of heart disease. By the way, there's also, I forgot to mention here, there's a lot of effort being made these days to understand HDL, triglycerides, LDL, and they're trying to break up these LDLs and HDLs into what they call fractions and particle sizes and these little proteins that are encircling these molecules. And they're trying to understand how long that they, what type of proteins they are, what the size of these little proteins are. If you remember that previous slide where these teenage kids are getting heart disease, that's because the size of these oxidized cholesterol and triglyceride type particles are now, they're now able to squeeze in between the epithelial cells of the lining of your blood vessels. And once they squeeze inside into the wall itself, then it starts inflammation. The cytokines are starting to call the immune response. You've got these immune molecules that are trying to gobble up these toxic things, and then the HDL, which is the good cholesterol, that gets oxidized and destroyed, and you've got chlorine and what is it, hydrochloric acid and whatnot that's being made inside of these cell walls, and it's destroying everything around it. So a new thinking of heart disease is not to focus on cholesterol. It's to focus on all the oxidative stress in the foods that we eat and the way we exercise and the way that we manage energy in the body. That's what they're focusing on. That's the new thinking of all this stuff. Dr. Adia also has a, he really tries to lay this whole notion of cholesterol as being the cause of heart disease by stating in a very simple fact that he had a graph, a very simple graph, which shows that half the people that have high cholesterol levels and half the people that have low or normal cholesterol levels, both groups suffer from heart disease and have cardiac events. And if there was such a clear correlation between high cholesterol and heart disease, you wouldn't have half the people that have normal cholesterol having heart disease as well. So he says that you really want to understand what your risks are for a heart attack and whatnot. You have to look at your levels of HDL, that's the quote-unquote good cholesterol. You have to look at the particle size of the LDL, that's whether it's big or small. You have to look at the amount of triglycerides, that's that fat that the liver is trying to desperately get out of the liver, and it's been these triglycerides primarily are coming from sugars, that, and Dr. Lustig also agrees with that. You have to take a look at the type of proteins and the protein coats that are surrounding these little fat globules that the liver is sending out into the bloodstream, hopefully to go in for storage or to be taken up by other cells in the body for energy. But if the body's need for energy is already overwhelmed and taxed because of the amount of RCOs that we're eating, then it just becomes a vicious circle and a recipe for heart disease. So in the next section here, and I'll take a break here for a moment, we're going to try to go into how to prevent these chronic diseases. Hi there, Courtney. Today we're going to talk about how to prevent chronic diseases. And we'll start with hypertension. Now, what is hypertension? That's having an abnormally high blood pressure. And this having a high blood pressure, it kind of can creep up over the years until you start to really have problems, and then some doctors want to put us on medications. Other doctors who are kind of detectives, so to speak, they'll try to understand what we're doing in our life that is causing a high blood pressure. So today I thought I would just kind of give an overview of some of the reasons that our blood pressure will start to go up. So I have a few handy items here from the prop department here in the village, and here's the point. When your heart is pumping away, and my hand here is make believe it's your heart and it's trying to pump away. Every time it pumps the blood through your body, the blood vessels, especially the arteries that are carrying all the nutrients from the heart, the arteries need to be able to expand a little bit every time. So every time the heart is pumping, you want this is the artery in your, one of the arteries in your body. I want you to make, just imagine it's an artery. And you want those arteries to be flexible. And you want it to be able to expand a little bit. So I have another little prop here. Let me get it. So now imagine this is your artery, and this is a cross section, this little circle here. I don't know if you can see it. But anyway, you want, every time your heart pumps, you want that artery to expand a little bit. In other words, it's flexible. So that's very important when we're talking about high blood pressure, because you want your arteries to be nice and flexible. You don't want them to be stiff like that pipe that I was holding a moment ago, and stiff and so hard like a piece of plastic that every time your heart is pumping, your artery cannot expand there for a moment. If your artery can expand, then it's got nice elastic properties, and your blood pressure will be able to stay in some nice, comfortable area. Now, the lower your blood pressure over the years saves your heart from overworking, because if your heart can pump efficiently and get the blood and all the nutrients around your body, and it could do it without stressing itself, then that goes a long way towards preventing heart failure and problems from hypertension, high blood pressure, because if you have pressure that's too high, one, the heart has got to work a lot harder, and number two, the vessel can spring a leak because it's just too high a pressure, like water spraying out of a garden hose. It sprung a leak because the pressure got too high, or something was obstructing the flow of the blood through the arteries. Now, what could cause obstructions? I have another little prop here. Let me grab it. Imagine now that this is the inside of your artery, and you can see it's red there on the inside, and there's some yellow marks there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, this is a little cutaway of your blood vessel, mainly your arteries. And so obstructions, when they talk about that, they talk about plaques that are forming on the inside of the artery. And if you can look closely there, you'll see that the red lining is more or less intact. And then there's this gunky plaque-looking material that is that's kind of gone past the lining and in between the lining and the rest of the structure of the artery. The rest of the structure would include other muscles and proteins and protective coatings and whatnot that make this a pipe. But this red innermost lining is the slippery, so that the blood can go through unobstructed and without any resistance from the cells that are lining your arteries. But what's happened here is that this plaque has been forming, and what happened is that some of the particles, these oxidized fat, lipoproteins they call them, or sugars or other injuries, have been able to slip in between each one of these little cells in the lining. Here you can see 4 little breaks there, And each one of those little breaks, those are where the cells in your lining would come together. And very small particles can slip through there. And then once they slip through, the body starts responding, because the cells that are on the inside of the artery there, called the backside of the epithelial lining, they sense that there's been an invasion, like a bacteria. In this case, it's perhaps not a bacteria, although it could have been anything that injures the inside of your lining, of your arteries. And I'm swimming here with one hand, that's why I'm puffing a little bit, and it's early in the morning over here. Well, not that early, but anyway, the body will sense that there's been an injury, an invasion on the inside of the lining of the artery, and suddenly those cells on the inside, they know something's wrong, so they call the army, they call the white blood cells, they call the soldiers that will try to come and clean out and repair that damage in there. Now, in this whole war zone, so to speak, you have oxidized particles, and that's what you want to prevent if you want to prevent obstructions. You want to prevent eating foods that cause oxidation and inflammation. So anyway, when we're talking about high blood pressure, you want to make sure that your arteries are nice and clean, a perfect circle, and they don't have this yellowized plaque. And it's not cholesterol that's doing that. Cholesterol is involved, but normally the oxidized cholesterols and the cholesterols that are made in your body from a reaction to the lifestyle that you're leading. And I'll try to talk about that as we go. So the last thing that can cause your high blood pressure, at least a very common cause, is having a lot of sugars in your diet, because the sugars, the glucose goes into the bloodstream, the fructose goes straight to the liver, and there it is packaged by the liver, as we've said many times, into fat, because the body doesn't want these poisonous molecules in the blood. Now, I know that glucose is not poisonous. It's needed everywhere in the body. But in high amounts, it is poisonous. And in high amounts, it's sticking to those red blood cells that are carrying all the oxygen and everything. The oxygen and the sugar is sticking to other nutrients in the blood, and it's sticking to anything it can stick to that's got a kind of a protein or any other kind of molecule that it can react with. Now remember, sugar is in water, and blood is water. It's very reactive. So in short, if you want to maintain a lower blood pressure, which is very good, less than 100 over less than 70 is good. I know that hypertension, they talk about 140 over 90 or something like that. That's the pressure. The 140 is when your heart is pumping and you've got all that pressure. And then the 90 is the pressure when the heart is resting for that split second. But in any event, we want the blood pressure as low as possible. You know, not to you're near death, but you want it somewhere around 100 over a little bit less than 70. Why not? Because it will just make sure that your blood vessels are not being pushed to the breaking point all the time, and your heart is not being forced to pump this blood through this plastic type of pipes now that you've been making from the diet, and you don't want to force your heart to be pumping past these obstructions, these plaques, and you don't want it to be pumping something that is really sticky. You can compare, when we talk about viscosity, you can compare the difference between honey and water. Water is a lot easier to pump, but honey is a lot more difficult. It's a lot thicker. And so how does it get more like honey, or how does it get thicker like that? It's because of a poor lifestyle. Too much, not enough water, not enough good water in your diet, by the way. All right, so let's just kind of review in general how we prevent hypertension and how we prevent high blood pressure long before it creeps up so high that now you're diagnosed with hypertension. The goal is to keep your blood pressure in a very moderate to low rate. And you know, the whole population around the world is, as we get into more unhealthy states, I think that what is normal starts to creep up here a little bit as an average. But anyway, I like to think in terms of about 100 over, I don't know, 65 or something like that. Something that's not very high. Now, as you know, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not qualified to make these judgments, but I'm just listening to a lot of other people who are experts talking about their whole idea of how to save the heart from stress. And a very important aspect of that is to keep your arteries and your blood vessels healthy. You don't want your blood vessels popping in your brain. That will cause a stroke. You don't want them popping in your legs. You don't want them popping in your eyes, because now you've got blood leaking in your eyes and you get loss of nutrients, and that's a principal cause of blindness. Anyway, hypertension is very serious, but the signs are there long before it ever becomes hypertension to such high levels. So, how do we prevent hypertension? Well, it is very doable with a healthy lifestyle. And what do we mean by that? Number one, we want to eat whole and natural foods. I'll go over that again and again in this whole series because I think it's important. So let's just talk about whole and natural foods for a moment. With all the vegetables, you want to have green leafy vegetables at every meal. Breakfast, lunch, whatever the meal is, have green leafy vegetables. You want to have these so-called cruciferous vegetables. Those are the vegetables that are high in sulfur. And you've heard of sulfur drugs and whatnot. The naturally occurring type cruciferous vegetables, like cabbage, Brussels sprouts. I know you love Brussels sprouts. You can't get enough of those in your diet. And you want to have the full rainbow of vegetables, full of all these phytochemicals and beautiful colors. Now, if you're going to be eating meat or fish or poultry, you want to eat the skin. You want to eat the whole part. You want to eat the organ meats. You want to take the bones and you want to boil them into a soup or a broth. Why? Because you want to leach these minerals out of the bones. Because now you've got a soup with all these minerals in it, and these minerals are very good for a healthy body. By the way, some people recommend something called a terrine. And a terrine is a kind of a bread pan a baking dish, so to speak, and you can put the broth from animal bones, and you can put vegetables, some fruits. You can put a little some meat products in there, maybe some liver, and then you can cook it all in a kind of a water bath. You can look on the on the YouTube about how to do terrines. And the water bath, in other words, you put this whole pan into another pot that's full of water. And one benefit of cooking and eating your animal products that way is because animal products contain cholesterol, and some of the experts are saying that's what you want, that's what you need, but you need cholesterol in a very good, you need it in a very good form. You don't want it too hot. You don't want it scorched. You don't want it barbecued or burned. Why? Because the cholesterol will, if here's this beautiful cholesterol molecule and you overheat it, well, suddenly it becomes this, you know, awful deformed molecule that your body's going to use to build the membranes of the cells and hormones and other precursors, molecules that cholesterol is used for. But suddenly you're giving your body a defective molecule. Anyway, these terrines, these are cooked in a water bath, and it keeps everything in there, oh, I don't know, not at a very high temperature, about 70 C, 70 degrees centigrade. And anyway, so the point of it is, if you do consume meat or fish or poultry, eat all of it. The liver, especially, and you've got to make sure, of course, that the natural part of the whole natural foods, all these foods, vegetables and meat products and whatnot, have to be raised organically, free range, and the animals have to be eating what they were meant to eat. So anyway, I always think of all the horrible things that they feed the pigs and the chickens, and they feed them these grains. They feed the animals that where meat is butchered, and they feed them soybeans, and they get sick, and then they have to give them antibiotics in the food, and they have to give them growth hormones so that they go to market faster and they're fatter and they bring a higher price. So anyway, you've got to make some really good connections to all the suppliers of your food, and you can try doing some of these. You can try raising some of your own animals with other people locally, and certainly growing your own fruits and vegetables in association with people whom you trust. The next thing on the list in terms of whole natural food would be all the fruits. And if you are eating fruits, you want to make sure you eat all of it. You want to eat the apple and the skins. You want to eat the grapes with the skins. If you're having beans, you want to make sure that you are soaking them. And you have a medley of these beans. You want to soak them because that was the way, generally speaking, we can assimilate all these beans without all these harmful anti-enzymes and other things that are on the beans. If you have grains, you either want to soak them, sprout them, or you want to ferment them. And if they are grains, you only want to have 100% of the whole grain, not just the inside, not just sprinkle some bran from some other unknown grain. You want to have 100% of that grain that you're putting in your mouth. You know, in the old days, soaking and sprouting kind of came naturally, because in the old days, if you go back hundreds of years, thousands of years, by the time the grain started to get ready to eat, it had already rained in the fields. They couldn't gather it up fast enough. The problem wasn't taking it home and trying to sprout and soak it. The problem was how to prevent it from sprouting after they, you know, when they tried to store it in the first place. How to prevent spoilage, because there was so they didn't have air dryers and electricity and refrigerators and all that back then. So all of these grains were 100% and natural. From the point of view that humans do not eat grass. The herbivores, or at least the ruminants they call them, they eat grasses, and they have 4 stomachs, and one of the first stomach, the job of that is full of bacteria to digest and ferment these grains. So I know when I'm talking about you can only have grains that are 100% and whole. That kind of just knocks out about 99.99% of all the grain and flour products that you might see walking into a supermarket. But that's just the way it is. If you want to have 100% whole grain spaghetti, find a way to sprout the grains first and then make the spaghetti. I suppose making spaghetti at home would be fun. I haven't done it, but could be done. Let's keep going here about whole natural foods and how to prevent hypertension, how to prevent your blood pressure from even ever getting to the point where you have hypertension. So if you're eating dairy, eat whole milk products with all the fat. Why with all the fat? Because you want all the fat soluble vitamins that are in there. There's K2, very important for the functioning of your body. There's vitamin A, vitamin D, I believe, and vitamin E. Some of these vitamins can only be found in fat, and that's why I was recommending to eat the skin and the fats and all that, even from the meat, fish, or poultry. Now, as far as the whole dairy world goes, personally, I believe that if it's raw and it's fermented, these whole milk products, you're doing your body a favor, because you're giving the bugs, you know, I like to call the bugs the lactobacillus and the yeast and all that. I affectionately call them the bugs. You give them a chance to pre-digest all these foods. So if you're going to have the butter and the cheeses, the yogurts and the kefirs and all that, try to find it in a raw form from a very reputable person that produces these products. And hopefully have it all fermented. If you're eating eggs, eat all of it, the yolk and the white part. And as far as cooking the eggs, lightly cook them. Oh, I forgot to mention, when you're making the terrine, they add a couple of eggs, and the eggs are not, the whole terrine is not highly cooked. It's certainly safe to eat. The temperature is high enough to kill all the bacteria and pathogens. But the benefit there is that the cholesterols and the other proteins inside the animal products are not denatured with high heat. And if you're having eggs and whatnot, you want to use a low heat. You want to poach them, lightly poach them, or you want to, you certainly don't want to fry them, and you certainly don't want to be using all these industrial seed oils that are attacking the egg components there, because these seed oils are rancid to begin with. They're rancid before you ever open up the bottle. All the vegetable oils are rancid. Even the so-called cold press vegetable oils. And why is that? Because they can't do the whole refining process and bottle it before oxygen and heat and other problems get in there, and light in these plastic bottles and all that they put all these oils in. Anyway, don't cook your eggs in oil. If you're gonna eat some of the starches like the potatoes, eat it with the skin. Sweet potatoes, eat it with the skin. If you're gonna have nuts and seeds, you want to try to make those raw as well. Walnuts and cashews, almond butter, to as much as you can soak the almonds and whatnot before you eat them raw. That's always good. And you always, in terms of superfoods, you want to have these soaked raw flax seeds that I talked about. You want to have fermented vegetables to have your gut full of probiotic bacteria. You want to eat mushrooms. By the way, mushrooms, I always add it to a tureen because I heard that your chances of having cancer, there are studies showing that breast cancer can be reduced substantially by adding mushrooms to your diet. These are, mushrooms are very strange. They are fungus, and there's always been a natural war between fungi and bacteria and all that, and they use a lot of medicines that probably come from spores and fungus and all that sort of molds. Penicillin is a mold. So back to the superfoods, you want to have mushrooms, fresh coconuts, and other superfoods that I mentioned before. If you want to have sweets and chocolates, nothing's better in the world if you have a chocolate, a desire to eat chocolate, than these raw cocoa nibs. They're full of magnesium, and they're just the whole bean. The nibs of the whole bean that's just been crushed, but you're still eating the whole bean, the cocoa bean. Sweets would include whole dates and whole fruits that you can make into jams. You don't have to add any sugars at all. Depending on the fruits that you use, you can steam these things kind of in a rice cooker, and suddenly all these fruits become a jam that you can, with all the pectin, all the whole fruit in there. So that's just kind of an overview again of whole and natural foods. On the next thing here on the list is you want to have good water and healthy beverages. So that water should be free of BPH or all these plastic endocrine disrupting compounds that your body believes are hormones that your body is making by itself. And you want to make sure that you're not ingesting any water that has chlorine in it or chlorine byproducts, because that is going to damage your cells in your body and make all those receptors malfunction and other chemicals that you need for hormone signaling. And you certainly want to filter your water, because, as Dr. McCullough said, if you don't filter it, you will become the filter. Your body becomes the filter and retains all of these pharmaceuticals and laundry detergents and all these other things that get into our water supply. As far as the healthy beverages, you want to, like I said, fermented vegetables, or fermented dairy product like the whey, or the if you can't get a really good raw milk. I'm not a fan of raw milk, only from the standpoint of I like the bugs to eat it first, so to speak. So I like kefir and whey more than I would raw milk, just because raw milk has the lactose in it, and it has casein and other proteins that are maybe in a form more for that calf, for that young baby goat, whatever they call them. So I just like the bugs to eat it first. But you want to make sure it's raw, all these fermented beverages. And herbal teas, wonderful. Nothing, don't drink anything that has any added sugars in it. And don't drink anything that is just some water from some apple that they squeezed, leaving all the fiber and all the other nutrients behind before they put it in a box and nuked it with high temperatures and whatnot, and put it in a container that's probably leaching all kinds of chemicals that are going to damage us if we were to drink it. The next thing on the list here is this business about the ratio, or trying to get as much omega-3 in your diet. There's plenty of omega-6 everywhere. Omega-3 is a lot harder to get. That's why I do mention trying to eat whole raw walnuts or soaked flax seeds, because these are precursors to some of these omega-3 essential fatty acids that we need for proper cell functioning. Again, this is all going back to keeping your blood pressure down, Corin, because you're trying to really take care of these, you're trying to take care of your arteries. This is what the prop department here gave me to show would be an artery, but you want it to be nice and flexible. And you know, another point, I don't hear it very often, but you know, your heart is pumping away. So you can imagine all of these blood vessels, they're all twisting and stretching every time your heart is pumping away. So they have to maintain a really easy path for your blood to get through every time all this, you know, earthquake, so to speak, is happening around all these blood vessels. I just heard that it's starting to rain here a little bit. We'll keep going unless it gets really noisy. Anyway, you want to keep your ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. You want to shoot for 1 to 1. I heard that the average American diet is 20 or perhaps 30 to 1 in some cases, where they're way overdoing the omega-6 from all these vegetable and seed oils. You want to have optimal levels of vitamin D, and you want to have good cholesterol in your body. Good cholesterol, if we're talking about eggs or any other products that have cholesterol, it's only the animal products. You want to make sure that the cholesterol is not denatured. And going back to vitamin D, the best vitamin D you can get is from the sunlight in the midday. Of course, as humans have migrated all over the world, there's less and less sunlight in the midday, where the angle of the sun is not blocking out the UVB, and the UVB is that frequency, that wavelength that is helping our body make the vitamin D. So you have to think of where you can get vitamin D in the foods that you eat first, before I would resort to supplements. Although there are probably some supplements that are very good sources of vitamin D, but I personally try to get it from the foods first. The next thing about keeping a low blood pressure is you want to reduce oxidative stress, and you want to stop these free radicals. These oxidized compounds, these free radicals in your blood, they go around and they damage your arteries. They damage the pipes inside your body carrying the blood. It makes things sticky. It causes a plaque and obstructions in the arteries. The next thing, of course, we want to avoid all these RCOs, these refined carbohydrates, and the oils. These refined oils are high in omega-6, so that just defeats the whole purpose of trying to match your intake of omega-3 with omega-6. And by the way, there are different omega-3s and different omega-6s. It's not just one little tiny one or the other. There are spectrums of these different compounds and little variations that man doesn't even understand how to duplicate them, much less make them and put them in some sort of a bottle or in a pill. So you want to try to get your omega-6 and your omega-3 from the most pristine, natural food source that you can. Finally, or not finally, keep going here. We want to increase our hormone sensitivity. Now your epithelial lining of your blood vessels, they have all of these hormones and receptors for the hormones and whatnot. They have enzymes. You want to keep that all in perfect health. And you want to think of each cell that is lining the inside of your arteries as something that you want to maintain at a cellular level. You want every cell, every epithelial cell to be working perfectly. Now there are only, I guess, I don't know, only millions and millions of epithelial cells, so that shouldn't be too many to keep track of. Somebody said if you laid out all your epithelial, I think it was Dr. Esselstyn, he said that if you laid all your epithelial cells out, it would cover a whole tennis court. But anyway, and every cell, of course, you'd have to look under a microscope. They're that small. Nevertheless, you want to keep the cell functioning at that level. You want to stay fit and firm. You don't want to have all this belly fat that you saw in that earlier picture of the owner of that big belly, because you've got just more body that has to be supplied with blood, and now you're making that heart work ever much harder and forcing it to pump that blood through all these little areas and all that extra fat and all that. And you have the visceral fat that we talked about. That is actually, if this is the heart, you've got the visceral fat that's clamping down and not letting that heart function without some clamp trying to prevent it from moving. As far as the next thing on the list here, you want to have low triglycerides. Now, low triglycerides is a very simple concept. It's very simple. Another factor to keep in mind to prevent high blood pressure is keeping our triglycerides low. And how do we do that? We want to reduce and eliminate all the RCOs, all the refined carbohydrates and refined oils. The refined carbohydrates would include the high fructose corn syrups, and the sucroses, the white table sugar, because they're loaded with glucose and fructose. And if you recall, Corn, the whole concept, this whole notion that sugar, excess sugar in the body, turns into fat. And so what does the body do? If the liver is presented with a lot of sugars in the blood, it madly tries to make fat. And what it does, it makes triglycerides, and it packs them into something called lipoproteins. Now, a lipoprotein, I'll just show it to you here. From our prop department, I got a lime over here. And on the outside of a lime, you know that there's a skin. And the outside skin, we'll call it the shell, is made out of what they call phospholipids and cholesterol and proteins. And this outer shell, so to speak, is the way that the body transports what? You remember? It transports the cargo inside. And what's the cargo? Triglycerides. or fat, or the energy that our body tries to store from fat. Now, the liver, when it makes these lipoproteins, and there are many different kinds, it will put not only on the inside triglycerides, those are little fat molecules, but it will also pack in some cholesterol as well. And so all these, and here's the little inside there, you can see, just think of the pulp in the inside of a lime or an orange. You can just think of that as the cargo. And the cargo is all this fat that the liver is trying to send around to all the tissues in the body that would take up this energy. And the primary target for all the excess energy goes where? To our stomach, to our visceral fat, to our blubber, our belly and our thighs, so to speak. So you want to keep the triglycerides as low as you can, and it's easy to do that just by reducing the amount of refined carbohydrates. The next point there, keeping the low LDL cholesterol particles. Now, particle is the most important word there in that little phrase, in that little idea there. You want to keep these little particles of these lipoproteins as few as possible, because the more you have, the more each one of them individually has the chance or the risk of being oxidized, and by all the oxidative stress and inflammation going on in the body. We'll talk a little bit more about particles in the following slides. The last point on this little list of things to keep in mind to reduce your blood pressure and to prevent hypertension is regular exercise. Why? Because if you have your muscles working all the time and you're active, they will keep using the energy that's coming in from your food. And the more energy your muscles use, the less energy in the form of sugars and fats that the liver has to convert into these lipoproteins for storage. So you want regular exercise to one, maintain muscle mass or even increase your muscle mass. That will increase your what they call your basal or base metabolic rate. So even when you're sleeping and working at your desk and not moving around, all these muscles will be hungry for all this energy. And you'll see that that will reduce these triglycerides, and it will reduce all these problems that end up in the blood vessels. Because your goal is to keep a blood vessel that's, like we said, nice and flexible, and you don't want it stiff and hard like some piece of plastic pipe. The plastic pipe does not expand every time the heart pumps, and the plastic pipe is not flexible, and therefore it will be very rigid every time your heart tries to pump the blood. If you can also keep your triglycerides down, your liver won't have to make so many lipoproteins, and in the futures, in the years to come, you won't have this horrible plaque and obstruction that is clogging up the arteries. So that's basically a little introduction on how to prevent high blood pressure and hypertension. So, how do we prevent heart disease? Well, let's just review that a little bit. Remember, if you take a look at this list, it may look a little bit familiar because everything you're doing to take care of your blood vessels is the same thing you're doing to take care of your heart. And, well, that should make you smile in one respect because I just spent practically an hour discussing how to prevent hypertension, and fortunately the same way to go about that is the same way to prevent heart disease. So anyway, here you have some little pictures of these lipoproteins. Now that little coily looking thing there on that pretty blue lipoprotein, that's an artist's rendition of these protein coats. And not the coat, but these proteins that coat are on the outside of the shell. And that's because the cargo on the inside, the cargo, which is full of triglycerides and some cholesterols, that cargo will not mix with the blood. So by evolution and adaptation over millions of years, animals figured out a way to get fats into storage and into the other tissues of the body, even though they're being transported through blood. And they do that by these wonderful little vehicles, these little packages. Here's another artist's rendition of the inside. You can see the triglycerides and the cholesterol on the inside. And here's another cutaway of the shell, this outside. We'll call it the skin of this lime. And that's dotted with all of those phospholipids and cholesterols, and that forms the that forms the shell of this molecule. And then on the outside of that, you've got these proteins. So when we're talking about preventing heart disease, it's the same idea. Whole and natural foods. You want good water with plenty of minerals. And you want to keep your body hydrated. You want to keep the blood full of all the necessary fluids. You want to shoot for this ratio of 1:1 omega-3 to omega-6. And I said to try to get it from as natural a source as you can. I forgot to mention a lot of experts recommend the cold water fish, whether it's salmon or maybe some sardines or whatnot. These, and you eat the whole fish, you eat the liver, you eat all of it. And when you're preparing the fish, try to do so in a way that processes the fish in a minimal fashion. You don't want a lot of heat. You don't want a lot of things that will denature the proteins and oxidize these fats that are in there. And you want to keep you want to have good levels of vitamin D, because remember, in your heart muscles, in your arteries, one cell is communicating with another as if they were connected by telephone lines. And I heard that these vitamin D, which are really hormones, they form these structures. They help form the structures of these lines of communication from one cell to another. And what's the precursor for vitamin D? Well, that's cholesterol. So you need really good cholesterol in your diet, unless of course you're a vegetarian and then you try to get your healthy fats from other non-animal sources. If you have a healthy diet, you're going to be reducing the oxidative stress and the free radicals. Those free radicals are attacking the heart muscles. They are attacking these lipoproteins. You see, if you've got sugars in your blood, whether it's glucose, elevated glucose there, or or you have fructose that's mixing, in the blood, in the liver there, it's going to be what they call glycating, or attacking all of the proteins. And one of the main proteins that you certainly don't want to have attacked and oxidized and denatured are these little guys, these lipoproteins, because they can go in between the lining of the cells, and they can form that terrible plaque, because they get these small little pieces here, lipoproteins, they go in between the epithelial cells, the lining, and underneath. And then I should put it that way. So therefore it's underneath now, that epithelial lining, and all this oxidized particles, these lipoprotein particles, and other oxidized and denatured nutrients in the body, and waste products in the body, I might add, can start to cause inflammation and develop plaques. Again, avoid all the RCOs. You want to increase your hormone sensitivity, because even the lipoproteins, they have hormone receptors there. Remember, insulin and GG are very involved in whether or not these lipoproteins are going, let's say, towards the fat for storage, and or whether they're kind of leaving the belly, leaving the fat stores, and being turned into energy. If you're in a storage mode, that's insulin and the whole symphony of insulin characters. If you're in GG mode, because you're in between meals, or you greatly reduce your carbohydrate intake, then there are other hormones inside the fat cells that start releasing these triglycerides in the form of a single free fatty acid, they call it, and that hitches a ride on albumin, as I said before. And then the other tissues in the body can use that free fatty acid, and the liver will convert some of that into ketones, and then your brain, which normally uses glucose all the time, after a period of time, and it may be weeks or months, it will start to adapt to using more and more ketones as energy, and reduce the amount of glucose that it might need or will need. But apparently you can reduce the glucose load on the brain by using ketones as energy. I've heard some people say as much as you can reduce that load to as much as 75%, which means that now even your brain, which is the biggest user of energy in the body per mass or per weight, is also starting to use your fat stores. So you can think of that as, thinking your way to fit and firm. Thinking your way to fit and firm. Okay, I like that. Anyway, you want to stay fit and firm, because you don't want your heart having to have all this resistance with all this fat locked around it. And in in primordial times and primal times, if we if we were lucky enough to have extra weight, to have extra fat, because there were long periods of famine, it was natural for, if we did get the fat, it would be stored around the organs. Fat is protective for the organs in the sense that keeps the organs from impact and whatnot. But of course, too much of a good thing is when it turns to a very serious situation where now the heart can't function properly because it's basically being clamped down and weighted down by all this fat. So anyway, keeping your triglycerides low, that's going to prevent this this plaque buildup. These cholesterol particles. If you look over here at this beautiful little colorful graph, Dr. Peter Attia has this in his lecture where he talks about the role of cholesterol in heart disease. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's a very large lipoprotein over here, and that's where that's the lipoprotein that receives a lot of the fats in our meals. And that goes through a very intricate process where it's digested, it's turned into free fatty acids so that the fat can get through the gut, and then it's reassembled again into a large lipoprotein. You know, if this is an LDL particle or something, this thing must be the size of a grapefruit or a basketball. But anyway, that doesn't go, this, it's called a chylomicron. It doesn't go directly into the blood. It's got to be kind of souped up by the lymphatic system, and then finally it makes its way into the bloodstream. And there it can be used by, as this larger molecule is traveling around in the bloodstream. If you are in storage mode, in insulin storage mode, then there are enzymes that are helping part of the free fatty acids inside of here to be able to get into the other tissues of the body that need that energy. Finally, you have a smaller molecule there, a smaller lipoprotein, and as it finds its way into the liver now, it's called a remnant. And that's when the liver starts to repackage all these things into what you've always heard of as the LDL. Actually, there's an LDL that the liver makes first, and that is this, it's called VLDL. And you can see there are a bunch of them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then as the energy inside of those lipoproteins are used up as they're going around the blood, then they turn into a kind of a middle form, a middleweight lipoprotein, and then finally they turn into an LDL. It's the LDL that people have always associated when they go to the doctor's office and get their blood tested, and they ask, well, you know, how much cholesterol is in there and what's your LDL? Well, all the new thinking about all of this subject is really it's not the cholesterol directly that is the most helpful way to judge your risk of a heart attack. And Courtney, you know, most women after the age of menopause, or in the age of menopause, the risk of a heart attack really goes up, and it's one of the primary killers in the world. And so how do you really assess your risk? Well, there's the new thinking on all of this is that you want to remember just really one ratio, and that's the ratio of your triglycerides to your HDL, which they call the supposed good cholesterol. And I say supposed good cholesterol because even the HDL gets oxidized and causes inflammation. And there's a doctor that will that has a whole YouTube lecture on that issue. But anyway, just remember this one little ratio, and that is the amount of triglycerides in your blood to the amount of HDL cholesterol in your blood. That ratio will go a long way to helping you understand what kind of cholesterol particles and what, not cholesterol particles, but what type of cholesterol and what type of lipoproteins you have swimming around in your bloodstream. If your triglycerides are high and your HDL is low, so you've got high triglycerides and you've got low HDL, then you can pretty much be assured that you are putting yourself at a high risk for a heart attack. And you're putting yourself at a high risk for the formation of plaques inside your arteries. Now remember, you can reduce these triglycerides just by eliminating all the RCOs. And if we're talking and just focusing on a healthy, whole and natural diet, and your triglycerides will just, they'll be so low, you won't believe how low they can get. And also, funny thing, when you have a healthy diet, your HDL will go up. And the HDL that does go up, they're not getting clobbered and oxidized and chlorinated and all that with all the other molecules in your blood. Why? Because you've gotten rid of all those excess sugars, and you've gotten your hormone sensitivity working in such a way that you're modulating insulin and the insulin symphony and the GG and the GG symphony. So everything is working as designed. Finally, on the preventing the heart attack, you want to have regular exercise. And it's not only to prevent sugars from building up and all that, but you want to have that heart. Heart is another muscle, and you want that to be increase your heart rate and all that you've heard about aerobics and all that. You want to do that, and we'll find out later that there's a doctor that has an even better suggestion than aerobics, and that's these burst high-intensity training. And I think there's something to that just from my own experience over the last 3 or 4 months after I started treading water as I was holding my hands. You can't see me treading water, but just to do this, I'm madly kicking my legs back and forth. So, that's how to prevent heart disease. How do we prevent diabetes? Oh, my goodness. There's the same list. Okay, well, we don't even really have to talk much about diabetes, preventing diabetes, because if we're taking care of our arteries and we're taking care of our heart, all those same things are taking care and preventing diabetes. Everything on the list. Everything on the list. Oh, Alzheimer's. Well, my goodness, there's that same list again. All joking aside, Alzheimer's is something, Courtney, all of us in the family, as we get older, we have to worry about. And remember before, I said that some doctors are referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. And why is that? Because the nerve cells in the body, they're not getting the amount of omega-3 that they need from natural sources. I keep saying natural sources as opposed to supplements and pills, because I guess for every how can you preserve something as delicate as an omega-3 essential fatty acid coming from a fish or krill or something like that? How can you process that and retain all the natural attributes of that molecule that the brain wants to use? Anyway, the brain is getting too much of this omega-6 fatty acids. Remember, the brain is mostly 60 or 70% fat. That's right, 60 or 70% fat. And all that fat, you want it to be in a very good form. You don't want it to be oxidized. Preventing Alzheimer's is really the main thing there is preventing oxidative stress. Oxidative stress here just attacks the nerves in the brain, the protective, they have a protective coating which is also made out of fats, and that allows the electrical signals to go. It allows these neurotransmitters between the nerve cells to function properly. So you want to eliminate as much as you can free radicals and the oxidative stress. Of course, you do that by avoiding the RCOs. We've talked about that. When you talk about hormone sensitivity, there are some scientists and doctors who believe that the brain can actually make some of its own insulin, and they believe that the brain uses that insulin to be able to allow glucose to get into the cells for energy. And if you are taking care of yourself and preventing heart disease and preventing diabetes and preventing hypertension, then that goes, it's the same thing in preventing Alzheimer's, because the hormone receptors on the nerve cells, they all have to be working properly. Again, on the list, you want to stay fit and firm. You want to reduce all the fats in your blood. You want to reduce the plaques and all that, so that your blood is getting, your brain is getting a wonderful supply of blood, full of oxygen all the time. And finally here, you want regular exercise. A lot of people, a lot of doctors believe that you can repair and even grow anew nerve cells in your brain. So anyway, a healthy lifestyle can almost assure us that we will not suffer from Alzheimer's. Now, a lot of people may believe that their parents or their parents' parents or whatever had Alzheimer's, and therefore they're going to get it. And I'm going to say something here that applies to all these chronic diseases. Perhaps some people have a genetic predisposition to having some chronic disease. But even this predisposition, in real life, as you go through life, you can do many, many things to prevent the expression in the genes of these horrible conditions that afflicted your ancestors. And so it's not a foregone conclusion that you're going to have the same problems as your ancestors. And that's because of this whole notion about gene expression. And that is what parts of the DNA, what parts of the gene are actually activated and start to cause all of these chronic diseases. And a healthy lifestyle certainly goes a long way to preventing these bad genes or bad characters from blossoming and causing all this damage. Finally, the last chronic disease that we'll look at here is cancer, and you'll see it's the same list of factors that we can use to prevent. Now, cancer has always been scary because it just seemed like, you know, your number is up. It's like Russian roulette or something like that. But if you follow a healthy lifestyle, you can be assured that you won't get cancer. Now, a lot of researchers and doctors believe that if we're looking at the cellular level, that there are always stresses that are happening to the cell. There are attacks. There are assaults on our DNA, on our chromosomes, and all of these this oxidative stress and inflammation and bad signaling and all that. In other words, the hormones aren't working right and all that. That causes one cell or another to go bad and to become cancerous. If the body is functioning properly, and remember, even, you know, cholesterol is there as a precursor for vitamin D, and what was vitamin D doing? It was helping with cell-to-cell communication. And if you've got a group of cells and they're all communicating with each other, they can sense that there's a bad apple in the barrel, and they won't let that bad apple multiply and consume all the other apples in the barrel. So at a cellular level, you want to be aware that there's cancer, there's uncontrolled growth that starts out with just one cell that's not acting in a proper fashion, and it starts multiplying and dividing and creating more bad actors. But if you've got appropriate levels of vitamin D that came from appropriate levels of cholesterol, because that's the precursor molecule, and if you have a healthy diet, low in oxidative stress, you can stop that single cell that's become cancerous. And then you can be doing that all over your body. And that's where we want to stop cancer. We don't want to stop it after we've detected cancer, because by then you may have a clump of cancerous tissue the size of my baby fingernail here. And I'm not sure how big a cancerous clump has to be to show up on some sort of a medical scan or a mammogram or something like that, or a biopsy. But we have to realize that in everyday normal function, there are cancerous cells occurring everywhere in our body every day. And it's up to us to understand at a cellular level how to prevent that. It's much easier to prevent than it is to cure. And as we all know, most quote-unquote cures for cancer are worse than the disease itself. So now we're going to talk about how we go about choosing a healthy lifestyle. I should say one more thing really about cancer before we leave this topic. You know, we talk about RCOs and refined carbohydrates and excess sugars. Many cancer cells become dysfunctional at the level of their mitochondria. And the normal cell machinery for energy starts to break down. And suddenly now, in simple terms, Corn, you have a cancerous cell that is not using the normal manner to make energy for that cell. And now suddenly it's starting to consume more and more what? Glucose. Glucose. So a lot of new thinking on this whole subject of cancer. They're starting to say that cancer is a disease of metabolism, a dysfunctional metabolism, not a genetic defect and not genetic programming from our ancestors. And this all goes back to this discussion here about gene expression and what's going to express itself at a receptor level, at a cellular level, at a DNA level. And so we have to think in these terms. So a healthy lifestyle goes a long way to preventing runaway glucose and sugar use by all these cancerous sugar junkies in our body. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in later slides here. So anyway, let's start now talking about how to choose a healthy lifestyle.